Welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne, and I'll be your guide as we explore the world of landscape photography through the eyes and lenses of photographers, both up-and-coming and seasoned professionals. I like to dig a little deeper into the way they think about their photography, how it fits in their lives, and where they see it going into the future. Simon Baxter's path to photography wasn't straightforward. A back injury in 2012 entered his adrenaline-fueled outdoor life, mountain biking, kayaking, snowboarding, and forced him to find a slower way back to the natural world. A labradoodle puppy called Meg did exactly that. Their woodland walks around the North York moors gave Simon something unexpected: the solitude, the complexity of trees, and the therapeutic benefits of time spent among them became the foundation of an entire career. He's now recognised as one of the world's leading woodland photographers. This week, Simon talks about moving from craftsman to artist, using composition to speak for the trees rather than simply document them. He discusses shooting locally to learn a woodland's rhythms, the mycorrhizal wood wide web.
G'day Simon, welcome to Landscape Photography
and
World.
Building a sustainable business through YouTube,
enjoying
workshops,
your morning.
books and prints,
It's
alongside
about
his
7 p.m.
involvement in the
at
617
night here for
Club
me,
with Thomas Heaton.
It's
I
great
hope
to have you on the
enjoy
show. Thank you for agreeing to be here.
No, thank you very much for being asked. It's always great to have an opportunity just to talk about photography and see where the conversation takes us.
That's exactly what I like to do. So why don't we talk about who Simon Baxter is, first off, and get a bit of background out of the way, and then we can talk a little bit about why Simon is a landscape photographer and why it's such a passion of his.
Okay, yeah. So I live in North Yorkshire, in the northeast of England, and I've had cameras since I was very young, probably 8 years old. I still remember the day that I bought my first camera while on holiday. And it's been a kind of casual hobby over the years that I've dipped in and out of. And then I think it was about 12 years ago, or getting on for that I discovered woodland photography after a series of unfortunate events. And I've been absolutely obsessed with that since, and I've been a full-time woodland photographer and only trees and woodland for about 8 years now, I think. So yeah. It's quite niche to be kind of full-time in something like that, but it's, I'm very fortunate in that respect.
All right, well, let's talk about what led to that, getting into that niche and why that niche is so important to you. What is it about woodland photography that has made you dedicate your life to it?
Without doubt, my primary reason for being in the woods is for the therapeutic benefits. Mm-hmm. It's a story that I've told a few times, but hopefully is a new one to some of your listeners. But I suffered a back injury back in 2012, which meant that my job as a self-employed website developer became very, very difficult. I couldn't sit at the desk and my income was plummeting, which obviously had an effect on my mental health as well. And my partner could see that I was struggling and suggested that we got a dog to help me out and give me some company at home, which absolutely turned things around. So Meg came into our lives in 2014. And I then just automatically reached for my camera again to photograph Meg. Then we kind of almost developed in tandem, because as a young puppy, she needed to be eased into being walked, the distances as each month passes by.
Yeah, sure.
So as she was able to walk further, I was able to walk further. And then when she was about a year old, I had the capability to, take her out into the local woods and landscape. So I photographed Meg, then Meg in the landscape, and then I started to turn my attention towards the landscape. Mm-hmm. So I'd shoot local landmarks, vistas, sunsets, things like that. But it never really kind of hit the spot because I was suffering with chronic pain. So while I was stood waiting for the light, my mind was constantly thinking about the pain that I was in. Yeah. Then I decided to head back to the environment which I used to mountain bike in, which is woodland. Mm-hmm. And I was wandering around one particular day in a place that I've never been before, completely immersed in that sense of exploration and discovery. And then I realized that an hour had passed by, and for the first time in 3 years, I hadn't thought about pain. So that was a very profound moment.
Wow.
And I thought, that is something that I need to repeat as often as I possibly can. So I kept returning to the woods and absolutely fell in love with it and never looked back. So I've only ever photographed trees and woodland since.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. The therapeutic benefits of photography have come up several times on the podcast, and it's really interesting. I love the story about Meg also, because everyone, I think, in the world that has had anything to do with dogs knows the therapeutic association that dogs have. Just having them around you makes you feel better. Except when you got to clean up the turds on the sidewalk or what. But I guess that combination is something that's a little bit unique, at least on this podcast. And I'm kind of interested in how the walking the dog has sort of made those ventures into the woodland possible, but also be something that you've really sort of latched onto. And I guess the other side of things that I like to explore is where people start to discover that they're actually creating art as opposed to just recording an experience.
Okay, yeah. Well, I guess the thing that the joy that Meg brought was the thing that's so special about being in the woods that I find is that there's this constant sense of, it's kind of like your senses are being overwhelmed sometimes. There's so much going on because you've got this constant stimulus. Everything's visually fantastic. The sounds as well, whether it's, you see a deer running by or it's the dawn chorus in the canopy. And the smells vary throughout the year as well. Nowhere changes with the seasons quite like woodland. So everything's constantly shifting, everything's moving. And, you get the lovely floral smells in spring. You get those lovely kind of musty smells in autumn. Mm-hmm. So there's this constant distraction because I think sometimes if you're suffering from something like chronic pain, there's this tendency to work too hard to try and be distracted, which for anyone who has suffered in that way knows that doesn't work. Whereas when I go into the woods, there's so much else, so many things going on that it leaves no room for the kind of negative thoughts. It's a genuine distraction. Mm-hmm. So you take that and then couple that with the joys of being with a characterful dog. And then she just brings that sense of, she's got such panache and she's playful and innocent, and also reminds you that the importance of living in the moment, because there's only one thing that she cares about, and it's splashing in the stream in that moment. It's picking up a stick and chewing on that. And she's just living for that. And that's all that matters.
Yeah.
So having that kind of constant reminder and to me, also remind me not to take it too seriously, because it's very easy to take it seriously when, you're dealing with pain and you're very serious and passionate about the work that you create. But she reminds me that there's so much joy to be had as well. And she always makes me laugh every single time that we go out. So it's this kind of magical marriage of laughter and joy with Meg, and then just joy and the privilege of being out in a woodland that's, devoid of other people as well. And that's something that I crave. So if you've got the privilege of that and it allows you to be completely immersed in the environment with a fantastic dog by your side, then it's without doubt one of the best things that could have possibly happened to me.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. So, but going on to, do you want me to jump straight into your next question about
how go for it.
The transition to art?
Yeah.
That's a tricky one, because even when I first became a full-time photographer and I started to run the occasional workshop, I still never considered myself as an artist, because I guess I'm quite self-deprecating. Sometimes that's healthy. Sometimes it crosses a line and can be a little bit debilitating, or you don't give yourself enough credit. But I always found it difficult to say I'm an artist. I was comfortable with calling myself like a craftsman, that I would craft
Okay.
an image. But then as time went on and I became more confident, because I'd obviously lost a lot of confidence with what happened with my back and having to give up hobbies and my previous business. So I think that was part of it as well. I just needed the time to gain confidence and then get to the point where I could accept that, yes, I was creating art. And I think, as to when that transition happened, it was after a few years, to be honest. But it was certainly when I became more aware that the images that I felt that I was making, it became more than just making photographs of things that I felt looked good in the moment.
Yeah.
There was more to it than that. I felt as if I tried to get some soul into the image. It's not something, that's not something that you can force, but I think that can happen when you're completely emotionally invested in the things that you love to photograph. So as soon as the emotion comes into it and the image that you're making is translating something more than just here's a fantastic looking tree, and it's saying something about, your inner world, but also, your unique view of the world, but also an empathy for the things that you photograph and trying to translate that too. So something that I like to say is that I like to try to speak for the trees.
Yeah.
Something in the way, I think composition for me is the language of photography. And that's something that I'm always striving to improve upon. And it's through composition that you can capture emotion, feeling, and hopefully show something of yourself as well and inject that little bit of soul, that thing that you can't put your finger on, but hopefully sometimes people see that in the work.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess one of the things that gets talked about quite a bit here on the podcast is that emotional tug that an image can create. And you said it really beautifully that the composition is the language of photography. And that really speaks to the point that I keep making on the podcast, that photography and art in general is a communication medium. It's a way of communicating either an emotion or a feeling or an event or a moment in time, and giving the viewer that visibility in a little window into your soul kind of thing, as you were saying, and saying, okay, well, here's a feeling that I'm trying to share with you. They might not have the same feeling, someone's going to look at one image and go, it's boring, or I don't like it, or the colour's not right, or whatever. And other people are just going to have that emotional tug. And it is about that communication. I'm really interested in how people feel that they are successful or not in that communication. Do you feel successful in terms of communicating those feelings to your viewers?
Yeah, I feel more confident in that now. Again, it's because I think that's worked in my favor. I think constantly thinking, oh, well, that's not quite good enough. I need to do better. And realizing that you can never really master photography, I don't think.
I agree.
There's always, I think the people that can be, that are regarded by others have been masters of their craft are ones that realize that they aren't. That it's a constant journey and there's always improvements to be made. And it's kind of my attitude towards it is that, it's a quest of doing justice to the trees for me, because you've got something there that's been so incredibly beneficial to me in a number of ways.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like I feel obligated to do it justice. I need to show the beauty and the variety of all the different trees that make up our woodlands. There's no prejudice there. It's I don't seek, obviously there's certain trees that I favor, but I make a point of photographing lots of different species, different assemblages of trees to speak again for the trees, for the woodland, rather than just shoehorning my own kind of preconceived ideas and objectives into the woods. This is about sort of saying, communicating, as I say, that there's beauty in complexity, there's beauty in scruff, there's beauty in the old majestic trees just as much as there is beauty in the young trees that have many, many years ahead of them.
Yeah.
So I guess that's sort of what I'm trying to show as well, if that makes sense.
And I guess the other thing that you can do you can do it with any sort of photography if you like. You can go from that broad, here's a collection of trees, right down to here's a piece of the root of a tree or a branch or a particular leaf even, and the patterns within those, and those sorts of things convey different messages and convey different emotions about those things to the viewer.
Yeah, exactly. Telling different stories. And I think the most important thing is, and I think what works for me is that it's almost like photography is the secondary component. It's not my primary reason for being there. And that really helps because I'm not going with, yes, I've always got ideas of images that I want to make, but years ago, I got rid of feelings of expectation, and it just became a quest for going out into the woods, enjoying that space, appreciating the trees and woodland for what it is. And no matter what happens, I can come away feeling fulfilled, feeling emotionally and physically better for having been in the woods. And if I get a photograph, great. If I don't, I don't. That's okay. Even as a full-time woodland photographer, I never feel the pressure to make an image. And that's a powerful thing, having that mindset of, I am here for the trees. And if I make a photograph, then that is a bonus. And I know that sort of sounds very romantic, but it is the truth. So often I go out and I sort of need to remember, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be making photographs. Sometimes I'm just kind of wandering around and, daydreaming in a bit of a day. But then in that process, it does allow you to see more.
Yeah.
Because you're not looking too hard. And it's another thing that you often used to say is, when you go into the woods, don't look for trees. And I guess I can come to that in a little bit more detail soon. But a lot of it is about mindset, not giving yourself any pressure to create. And then in the process, you just kind of everything just sort of feels a little bit lighter, and you can just wander around with complete freedom and feel present and receptive to anything that presents itself.
Yeah.
And then it just means that you see more. When you're not looking too hard, you see more. Things just reveal themselves. And that you're constantly reminded of that, because I'll have tiny pockets of woodland that I've been photographing for 10 years. You think you've exhausted every opportunity, and then you go in on a different day, different mindset, different conditions, different time of year or whatever.
Yeah.
And then something else is just like, ta-da. And then you realize that you could be photographing this place for another 40 years and there'll still be opportunities. And that's what's so magical about working locally as well, I think, is how
and
time and time again.
I want to get into that as well. I think woodland photography is kind of similar. It's probably slightly slower in its changes, maybe, than say seascape photography. But one of the reasons why and I'm not niche, that's all I do. I do a lot, but seascapes for me are sort of my main draw for me to go out and make images. And it's the ever changing. I can go to the same beach and I have a couple of favourites that I just keep returning to year after year, and sometimes week after week if the conditions look like they're going to be right. And the reason for doing that and going to that same place is you have intimate knowledge of where to look.
Yep.
But also you have the ability, or you have the benefit that you know that things are going to change. The sand's going to shift, that rock's going to be exposed, different tides are going to come and do different things. In woodland, you have that similar sort of thing. Rain, sun, cloud, just in daily weather, and then the changes of the seasons really enable you just to return, as you said, just to small pockets and just hit them up again. And as you say, you could keep doing it for 40 odd years and not get bored with it.
Yeah. And when it's kind of, I adopt this attitude even if I go further afield. I have that kind of local shooting mentality, because I think what's really important is to settle into the rhythms of a location. So every single woodland is entirely unique. It behaves differently. Obviously, the assemblage of different trees and species is different in each one. But even one wood, which is only a valley or two over from another wood, can be completely different. They have their own little sort of microclimates. And some of them are much more complex and more difficult than others. But having that frequency of visit not only allows you to kind of, when I say the rhythms of the woodland, it's how the light falls, what can be impacted by the weather, the seasonal changes, getting to understand all the different species that make up that wood. Why is that important? Which trees have blossom, which trees then blossom and then have berries, which trees, the color turns first in the autumn time, which look best with snow, which have the most character when you see the bare bone structure, all sorts of different things. And then sort of tying into that is obviously the ecological knowledge of the woods and trees too. And that can sort of really help. And it's knowing, now that we're well into spring, it's knowing which woodlands I need to target because the bluebells are starting to come out, or the wild garlic is starting to come out. And then, there's the blackthorn blossom, and then there's the hawthorn blossom, and it just kind of keeps on going. So you've got this, I have various woodlands locally that I go to photograph, and they all have their own special things going on at different times of year. And it's sometimes difficult to keep track of it. And I think the best thing to do is just say, right, spring this year, I'm targeting these 2 woodlands, and that's it. And just devote your time to getting the most out of them. And again, because if you try to spread yourself too thin, photograph too many different places, then you might get more photographs. But have you made the image that really speaks for that location? Again, going back to doing somewhere justice. For one particular season, I'm very happy to get, if I can get one like really special image from one particular woodland, then that gives me the greatest sense of fulfillment. And that's the joys of shooting locally.
Yeah. You mentioned something that is of interest to me as well around the ecological knowledge. One of the things I know I do is I've learned a hell of a lot about geology just through looking at and working with rock formations, whether it's a quartz reef or a basalt column or whatever. And that scientific understanding of where those things are going to occur and how they are made and all those sorts of things, because that fascinates me in as much as making an image from them. Do you have that same sort of approach with your work and your environment? You mentioned knowing both the environments that you're going into intimately is important. Do you go that deep and understand, okay, well, I know some of the biological processes, the fungi that are, helping the trees communicate with one another and those sorts of things? How deep are you going into the science?
Well, really, it's not particularly deep when you consider just how deep you can go.
That's true. I wouldn't call myself a geologist by any stretch.
Yeah. As soon as you dip in your toe into that, then it's never ending. And even if to others, you appear to have a very broad knowledge, you've literally just scratched the surface.
Yeah. And
obviously, we're never ever going to fully understand what's going on, I don't think. But I don't want to either.
Okay.
That's part of the magic, is knowing that something special is going on, and the fact that you never fully understand it, or I have no desire to fully understand it because I want that mystery as well.
Nice.
If I can take on something that is, there's some scientific research which backs it up, but then I'll get to a point where I think that's enough for me. That is enough for me to take that and interpret it in a way that I can put into my photography. I can interpret in science, because science and art, they run side by side, and every now and then they'll converge.
Sure.
And it's like, I'm very fascinated. So back in 2016, I read a book called The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter, what was he called? Peter Wahlberg? I would just made that up. Wallenberg? Anyway. So he talks about the wood wide web and the way that trees communicate underground through the mycorrhizal network. And so you got all these very sort of fine fungal threads and, millions and millions of miles of these fungal threads, which allow trees to share nutrients and, communicate with each other. can warn other trees, by releasing chemicals through the leaves that there's an insect attack, something like that. So they can release chemicals to help protect themselves, all sorts of things going on. And I don't need to run too deep on that for that to give me inspiration from a photographic standpoint. So the fact that I can imagine this network of roots and, going into the mycelium and trees communicating underneath ground, then I flip that upside down and I can imagine that communication above ground. So you start to see the branches, not just as branches of the tree, but as this, again, network highway where one branch can merge into another, where one tree can then create a relationship with its neighboring tree. And then you start to see this communication network of branches and these relationships. And then you start to realize that, trees don't stand alone. Yes, you get very majestic, ancient trees, which looks fantastic in their own right, but everything is a community. Everything's working together. It's just this huge, everything's connected in some way. And as soon as you see that and you're just a mere visitor into their home, then you just view it in a different way. And then that's when you start to step back, and quite often I'd take wider views now than I used to. So you can make them more complex to communicate the complexity of nature. It's inherently complex, not to shy away from that, but also to highlight that everything's just working together. And I usually find those slightly broader scenes as well to be more immersive, and then helps translate the experience of being in the woods, so that when you make an image and you print it and you've got it in an exhibition like I've just had recently, then people can look at that and feel as if they just want to step into it. They want to reach out and touch it, or they can imagine themselves stood there, because if they were, that's pretty much what they would see. And that's always been an objective as well, is translate the experience, make people want to go into the woods and present images that are believable, so that they can really imagine themselves there.
Sure.
Yeah.
The decision to do this full time, obviously, economically, it's harder and harder to make money out of photography. Really, most of what I see in the community, at least in the landscape community anyway, weddings, events, real estate and whatever aside, is really down to doing good educational tours or workshops.
Yeah.
Was that a big part of your decision to do that? How did you go about thinking about that leap to say, okay, well, I'm going to dedicate this as my career? What was it that was going through your mind at that time?
Panic. I think the thing is that I knew that it was game over as far as having a career sat at a desk is concerned.
Sure.
I knew I couldn't continue making websites. And I think really the timing, if that was going to happen, then timing was good, because everything, in that industry has completely changed as well from what I used to know.
Yeah.
So, but I had a friend back in 2015 into 2016, Thomas Heaton, who's a big YouTuber. And so I'd been out and done some shoots with him, and he said, why don't you start a YouTube channel? If you've seen, he said, you definitely have lots to say. And he said, you'd really benefit from having a YouTube channel if you want to reach an audience. And I thought, maybe there's something in this. But there wasn't any real commercial goals at that point, other than because I was still making websites. I had to pay the bills, but it was something that I could explore and just see what happens. But I remember Tom saying to me, don't pigeonhole yourself to woodland. People want to see more. And I said, well, I can't do that. That's, woodland is what I do. Just going into the woods with my dog is what I do. If I was to do anything else, it would feel disingenuous.
Yeah, you can't change who you are.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where my voice is. This is where hopefully I've got something to say, even though I was still kind of, the woodland photography is still in its infancy. I just felt as if, because of my connection to it, as if it was something that I wanted to share, because it was, like I said, it was a profound experience. It was something magical, and it was something that you kind of wanted to shout about as well.
Absolutely.
So so I made my first YouTube video in 2016, which I think is still my most viewed video ever. The first video seemed to do really well because I put, quite a bit of effort into the first episode. And then it kind of just seemed to snowball from there. And it was only sort of 2.5 years after that, I think, or two years after that, that I took the step to go full time. And it was kind of like a gradual transition. I thought, I don't want to jump into just immediately offering lots of workshops because I still have things to learn myself.
Yeah.
So I just started to do some one-to-ones, and I wouldn't charge a lot of money for those. And then that would give me the confidence to then do some group workshops. And it just kind of went from there, really. And then I think I used to be absolutely reliant upon workshops, and I still do rely upon those. But obviously now I have books, which are a good source of income.
Yep.
We just had the All the Woods of Stage exhibition, Joe Cornish and I, which has just recently finished. But it's extremely difficult to make a profit from putting on a big exhibition because the cost involved is crazy.
Yeah, the upfront costs can be prohibitive, particularly if you've got to hire gallery spaces and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. So we had about, I think it was 66 prints framed.
Oh, wow.
Which we had professionally framed, which was very expensive.
Yeah.
So we knew it was a big ask to make a profit. But we did, and it wasn't much of a profit. You're not going to make, a career out of photography doing exhibitions like that. But we were fortunate enough to be in a position where, Joe's been a photographer for decades. So he's in a better position than I am. But I thought, right, so long as I cover my costs and hopefully make a bit of profit, then it's absolutely worthwhile. If you to take into account all the days and days of time alone, you're never ever going to get anywhere near. You're not getting paid for that at all. That's just time you invest because you love doing it. And not to mention the amount of days that I've spent at the exhibition, where I could have been doing other paid work, but I wanted to be at the exhibition, meeting people, talking to visitors, and just getting the opportunity to speak passionately about the prints, because that's another side of photography that I'm passionate about is printing. Anyway, what was the question? Because I'm going off on a tangent again.
I can't even remember. It was a good tangent. It was a good tangent. No, it was what was going through your mind in terms of when you decided to go full time. And it sounds like it was a fairly organic process.
It was. But the thing where I'm perhaps sort of different to some, but not all, obviously, is I have this sort of internal compass. My kind of personality type means that integrity and authenticity is very important to me. And if I start to compromise that, then I just hate myself.
Yeah.
So that's why I've only ever stuck to Woodland, because that's what I love. And then it's why the kind of output of videos on YouTube started to peter off a little bit, because sometimes I realized it was affecting the photography. And I knew that if I started to lose the passion for woodland photography, then it would be game over. So it needs to feel like it is still a hobby, that I just want to be out there in the woods regardless. So I protect that with absolutely everything that I can. And that does mean that sometimes you take a hit in terms of your commercial success, because I'd probably be a lot more commercially successful if I'd been doing videos every single week for the past 10 years. But I just decided not to do that because I've always just wanted to be a photographer and love being in the woods, who just happens to create a few YouTube videos. But I must obviously be clear as well, I'm extremely grateful for what YouTube has given me in terms of reaching an audience. And obviously people then who come on workshops and, buy books and buy prints, that kind of thing. So YouTube has helped to create a business, but it's also important that when I do put a video out there, that's because I genuinely have something to say, not just creating a video for the sake of it. So it's a whole mixture of things now, books, exhibitions, prints, workshops, etc. But also making sure that I give myself lots of time just to, just for me and Meg to be out in the woods without having to worry about videos and not even having to worry about making photographs sometimes. Yeah. So it's a very, very difficult balance.
Yeah. I talk about balance quite a lot, particularly in this sort of part of the podcast where we're talking about how people make the leap into professional photography, or even those that haven't and either haven't thought about it or don't want to do it. You touched on one of those reasons is that making it a job, it becomes a job. You then start to fall out of love with the craft and with the reason why you started doing it in the first place. But I'm interested in the lessons that people learn out of running their own business. What's the number one thing that you've kind of learned from doing that?
Blimey. There's a question, because it's not really something that I've ever really thought about. Number one lesson from running my own business. For me, it kind of goes back to what I've just said, really. It's about authenticity and integrity, just staying true to yourself.
Yep.
And, once you've found the lane that makes you happy, stick to it. Because I think what comes from that is something new. I mean, it's not going to be something unique. I don't think there's anything. I think everything in photography has been covered. But if the photography is you, and you're not striving to create images that you think are going to be the most commercially viable, but if you put every ounce of yourself and your heart into your work, then I think that will stand you in good stead.
Yeah.
Because it means you'll evolve naturally, organically, without the pressures of running a business. You just got to find a model where you can earn enough to sustain your passion, to pay your bills, etc., which is where the kind of balance comes in. But if you protect everything that's important to your emotional side of photography, then it keeps it sustainable, and you can keep the energy flowing and the passion flowing and that fire in your belly, and then just keep that going for years and years. Yeah. Otherwise, that's why people burn out. That's why people start to just dislike photography. And I know numerous professional photographers who, from the outside, will look like they still love photography, but they don't. It's just that's the facade that they have to put on for the business.
Yeah.
It is literally a job for them now. And I just think that's a bit of a shame. And then for me, because I don't have a mountain bike anymore, I don't have kayaking and snowboarding and all those other adrenaline-fueled sports, this is my hobby as well. And I have to protect that.
Yeah, marvelous. You talked a little bit about running workshops. What can somebody that books a Simon Baxter workshop expect? What does a workshop that you're running look like?
Well, one of the biggest draws for everybody is that Meg comes on all the workshops.
Nice.
Yeah, that's usually the question that I get asked is Meg coming? Because if not, I'm cancelling. I guess what I try to do in workshops, so let's say, for example, a residential workshop. So if we're going to spend 6 days in Scotland, for example, I guess what I offer, again, it comes back to authenticity, is trying to give people an experience that is reminiscent of what I would do if I was there on my own. Sure. So because this is where it gets quite tricky, because there's things that I will do on my own which might be a little bit risky for taking clients out. Yep. So you've got to make sure that you're responsible in terms of where you take people, but also I have a good client base who know what to expect and are quite happy just to take responsibility for themselves. So I want to take people to places that I've discovered myself. Obviously mixed in with that woodlands where other people will have been as well, other photographers. But I try to find the location, just like I do locally. I've spent years and years just scouring the map and going for walks and just trying to find somewhere which isn't being photographed and sees very, very few people, just have that kind of privilege of solitude. And that's the kind of experience that I want to give to workshop clients as well. It's like, here's a location that I found myself, and the chances of us seeing someone are extremely slim. So they get to not just, have an experience that is similar to what I always crave, but it also gives them the creative space to just go out there and gives them some respite. Because, a lot of photographers, you've probably seen this yourself, are quite solitary beings. And even though they're in a workshop environment with another group, they enjoy that social aspect, but you can see that some of them, they just need a little bit of respite. They just need to recharge. And that's what all my clients get, is that opportunity, is that once they get out into the woods, if they want to disappear for 3 hours, they can. Everybody has a radio, so they can reach me. So that's for safety reasons, but also that they can, reach me and say, come and help me with this, please, Simon. So that's important, that it's not just about learning photography, it's about the experience of being in the woods, and for me, trying to sort of share the experience that I always crave as well. Whereas something like a one-to-one is a bit more intense in terms of its teaching. So I would never carry my camera during a one-to-one. It's just me and the client, and very much about trying to fill their head with ideas and thought processes so that they can take away that new information and hopefully apply it to their photography and the places that they love to photograph.
Fantastic. You mentioned Thomas Heaton before, and I know you and he have started a bit of a project. I'm not sure what you exactly you'd call it, the 617 Club. Tell us about your involvement in that.
Yeah, so Tom and I had been toying with ideas for a separate business for years. We started other things and then canned it, and then Tom came to me with this idea for an online community. And I was like, brilliant, that sounds great. So then we immediately jumped into research into platforms that we could use, kind of ready-made platforms that we could adapt to a photography community. And then we built it from there. We went through a test phase of about, I think, 3 months, something like that, I guess, during one summertime, where we invited about 40 or 50 people. And we just kind of built the community from there. So we got their feedback, and, we started to create discussion spaces. We would run a live stream every single week. We would create meetup events, in-person meetup events. And with their feedback, it kind of set the foundation for then opening it out to the public. And our founding members, they get, I think, 50% off for life for their membership, and obviously free during the test phase. It's evolved into something that we're very proud of, actually. And I think it's the members that we have to thank for that. We kind of set the foundation, and we made it very clear about what we wanted the community to be. So we try to instill that sense of support and positivity and an environment where people feel entirely confident to share their work and know that it's going to be positively received. But it's the members that have really kind of forged it from that point onwards. We give that encouragement, like we put the framework in, and they've just adopted that and created something that's really quite wonderful. So there's over 400 members. And obviously within that, you get people who aren't maybe there's a bit more on the sidelines, but then we get the people who are just always involved and supporting one another. But we still do the weekly live streams. We have guest speakers. We still have meetups. Members organize their own meetups as well. And there's been some genuine connections built there as well. People that have created new friends and regularly go out shooting together now. So that's a great thing to see.
Yeah. No.
And so it's great. It's going well. We're happy with it anyway.
Yeah, good to hear. I'll include links to 617 Club, etc. in the show notes as well. So if anyone's interested in joining up or taking a look, I'll make sure that you can find it. I'm interested in how people manage risk in their lives, but particularly out in the field. You talked a little bit about, you would do things that you would do things on your own that you wouldn't do with clients. Now,
yes,
the obvious reasons for that. What sort of horror stories have you got from your experience where things haven't gone quite to plan?
Oh, blimey. Well, nothing too bad, thankfully, which is why I'm still sat here now. But I am, or was, a bit of an adrenaline junkie. So if I find myself with a bit of sense of danger, then I kind of get a bit of a kick out of it, to be honest.
Okay.
So I think being a photographer and having that quiet time in the woods has made me quite mellow, but I still crave that little bit of excitement as well. So there's been occasions where I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and if something, this is, to be honest, this is the case every time I go out with the camera, is that if something happens, then I'm in trouble, because unless I've got a phone signal, of course, But if I fall and I'm knocked unconscious, nobody's going to see me and nobody's going to walk past. And that's always a risk in itself. So I have to be conscious of that. But there's been times when, I've been in a Scottish glen and I'm next to a burn, and then it's torrential rain. And then within minutes, this burn turns into a raging torrent. And I'm literally an inch away from the edge of it trying to make a photograph. The tripod leg is literally right on the edge of the rock, and you're stood on slippery rocks, and you just think, well, if I slip here, then I'm a goner. But I'm quite, I'm excited by that as well. Just in the same way I've been out on an exposed hillside in Scotland with reading the weather and thinking some snow might come up, so I've come through. So I've gone to higher ground, and the next thing, a snowstorm comes through, and you're completely exposed. And there's snow dashing everywhere, and then there's claps of thunder echoing around the mountaintops. And I'm just there alone. It's white out. You can't see anything, but the atmosphere was just fantastic. And that feeling of exposure and being at one with nature is something really quite special, I think. When you feel nature biting at your skin, and you get to the point where you have to stop taking photographs because you can't even feel the buttons anymore. I quite like that. I really do. And there's a time recently in the local wood where I was at the base of a steep hillside and I was looking up and thinking, those trees up there look quite interesting. And then rather than doing the sensible thing of trying to find a route which took me round and a gentle slope up to the trees, I just went straight up. And I realized about halfway up that this was a bit of a mistake when I'm literally on my hands and knees crawling up the hill. And I turn around and thinking, there's never in a million years I would try to descend this hill. Why am I going up it? Because one slip and I would have been in a lot of trouble. So my heart was racing, the adrenaline was surging as my feet were slipping, and I'm trying to grab tree roots to get myself up. But I still loved it. I don't.
Really feel that. I shot a waterfall. Where is it? Down probably about an hour and a half south of where I live. And to get the shot that I wanted, which is kind of down in the ravine formed by the waterfall itself, so you could look back up at level pegging as opposed to looking down from the top, I had to sort of scramble down this hill, and I could see a platform down further where I knew I could set up a tripod and get the shot. So I went down there, got the shot, and then it was, okay, so how am I getting back up? Because it was lots of leaf litter as well, and it had rained recently, which is why the waterfall was of interest. It was when I go shoot waterfalls, it's after rain.
Yeah.
There's more water in them. And so, it was tree roots and grabbing onto tree trunks and things like that, and using the tripod as a bit of a walking pole as well, trying to go up this hill that was like this. And it's, but you wouldn't swap it for the world, would you?
Absolutely not. No. I did have an incident recently where I was going up a slippy, muddy slope, and I don't know why I've done this, because I've learned my lesson. Well, obviously I've not learned my lesson, but I've made this mistake before, where I was carrying the camera on the tripod. So I was carrying the tripod, camera was on the end, didn't even have a lens cap on, and I slipped. Slipped, camera hit the ground, and I thought, well, it didn't hit it hard, it'll be fine. But then I lifted it up, and muddy grit had hit the lens and scratched it. So it's not going to affect the photographs, but obviously it's quite annoying when you've got a very nice lens with a very obvious scratch on it.
Yeah.
One day I will learn my lesson.
I don't think anyone will.
No. Yeah.
You talked about printing your work. Are you doing your own prints? Are you using a lab? How do you go about prepping an image for printing? Talk to me about your print practice.
Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just lift the camera up a second. There you go. Okay. There's the printer.
I can see the big. Is it a Canon or an Epson?
That's a Canon.
Canon. Yeah.
So that's so that's a 24-inch roll paper, and there's the kind of plan chest for storing my prints.
Yep.
Let's pop that back down there. So yes, so print from home. So all the prints for the exhibition that we did as well. Joe printed his, and I printed mine. Joe has pretty much exactly the same printer, but a lot wider. I think it's like a 36-inch roll, something like that. So absolutely huge. And I've been in fact, I don't know why. I guess obviously because I had an interest in photography from, many years ago and did some printing at school. It was just always on my radar to print from home, have done for a long time. So very soon after getting into woodland photography, I bought my first printer, our first more professional printer, you might say. So it was the Canon Pro 1000 when that was first released. And I just instantly recognized its benefit in terms of it kind of it feels as if it kind of completes the journey. So I like to think of this creative thread. So the thread that runs from the reasons why you even step out the front door to go and enjoy photography, or to just go and enjoy the woods. And that thread that runs right through to, the woodland that you choose to photograph, the scenes that you choose to photograph, why you're targeting a particular tree or scene or whatever. And that kind of intention that runs through, which then informs your editing process and then informs how you edit the image for print, and then why you're choosing that particular image for print. And then it's on the wall and you've just completed that full journey. And I love the sense of fulfillment from that. And all the experiences that are wrapped up in that process as well. There can be all sorts of things. And it's why I love to exhibit as well, is not to only showcase images in a way that they were always intended to be viewed in my mind, as a print, but also gives you the opportunity to stand with people and recall all those experiences and relive those experiences, which is lovely in itself. But apart from anything else, apart from all that, I think it does improve you as a photographer as well, because it absolutely fine-tunes your appreciation for texture, color, and different forms of light. So this wall behind me here is a magnetic wall.
Nice.
So using magnetic paint.
Yep.
So I can print something off, pop it on there. I mean, she's a permanent fixture, Meg there. But yeah, it means I can print something off and just live with it, and let that there's this constant feedback loop of just living with that print and thinking, well, I could make that adjustment, or actually I could even just go back to the wood and improve upon that compositionally. So yeah, having a print on the wall to remind you of why you love photography, but also to give you that feedback, I think is powerful, and certainly much more powerful than viewing it on screen, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. Can't disagree with you whatsoever in that regard. I absolutely love printing, and to me, images aren't really finished until they are in the printed form. Might only be a test print, might only be a small little A4 or 8x10 or something like that. But
yeah,
I create books. Listeners will know that something that I do. I create books not for publishing and selling, but just for replacing the old photo albums. So it might be a mix of art shots or candid shots, or just even phone shots of places we've been during the year. But every year we create a book that allows us to flip through and be able to see those images in print. And I think it's a practice that you don't necessarily have to print yourself, but if you have the funds and the ability to do it, I suggest you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's your legacy as well.
Too right.
Yeah, you're going to leave, it's why I invested the money in the plant chest, because I realized it was important for me to not only have somewhere safe for prints, but to give me that space to then get them organized, build them up over the years. And that's going to store many, many years of photographs. And that's what you want to kind of leave behind. You don't want to leave behind a hard drive.
No, that's it. Yeah.
You want books, you want things that if put together with just hard work and absolute sheer love of it. And that's what you get to share through print as well. Is not just, you share that through the photographs, sure. But with the print, it's just another layer of love and care in the creative process.
Yeah. That leads me to a question around where you see photography's place in society. Where do you see it now? Where do you see it going? Has it changed since you started?
Personally, it's not really changed that much for me. And I'm also not really, the whole AI thing is worrying and as irritating as it is. has never really personally worried me, in
Yeah.
terms of the impact that it's going to have commercially. I guess that I think I had a comment on an Instagram post yesterday, which saying, "Is this post AI generated?" What are you talking about? But I just kind of laugh it off. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think what I hope for, and it's kind of part of the way that I see the world. Really, is I like to try and sort of see the world as how it could be,
Yeah.
rather than it is how it is. And I'm hoping that people are going to crave just the truth and real things more and more.
Yeah.
And I think that's where workshops play their part as well. People are just going to, and I think the way that we talk about photography online, the way that we present our work and the details that we give to make it very obvious that this is very real.
Yep.
And this is something that you can go and see and experience for yourself. I think the way that we communicate our work might have to change a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that people can take it as the truth.
Yeah.
But also,
I see that as a really important point. I've been now for a few years including all the EXIF data in my social media posts.
okay, yeah.
Two reasons. One, I used to get asked, what camera have you got? What settings did you use? Those sorts of things. And it doesn't always stop those questions. I still get asked those questions, even though it's there in the caption, because who reads them? But it goes to your point of saying this is something that I've actually created, and here's how I've created it. It's not all of the details about how I've created it, but it's enough to make you realise, okay, well, this can't have been AI generated, because, anyone could create a set of fake EXIF data if they wanted to, but here it is, and I will happily show you the raw files and so forth. And
and it's why we need to keep printing and exhibitions alive.
Absolutely.
There's again, because of the lack of financial return in exhibitions, I think if people can, if they're in a position where they can exhibit and not worry too much about that, then, or just do it in a different way, do it in a smaller scale, just do it something where you don't have such a huge outlay, then I think it's important that people continue to do that, but that photographers and the community at large get right behind it. And I think that's just as important, because I think because of, YouTube exploded in terms of landscape photography channels. And I think sometimes we're in danger of having this attitude of, I've got all the resources that I need at my fingertips on my phone or on the computer screen. And it's just not true. That is never, ever going to compare to actually being out there on something like a workshop and learning face to face. It just doesn't compare to following a tutorial on YouTube. And that's the experience that I've had anyway. And, so we've got to get behind people who are running, authentic, considered workshops, but also get behind and support exhibitions.
Yeah.
All the stuff that's real and is absolutely crucial, I think, to the art of photography. I think, the more we can get behind that and support each other, the better.
Yeah. What advice would you give the 8-year-old Simon Baxter?
The advice, the 8-year-old Simon Baxter, I probably would have said, start photographing woodland now. Just imagine if I was like a full-time woodland photographer
From the age of 8.
Yeah. Oh, if I was if I was trying to go full-time when I was in my 20s, blimey, what a different world that would have been.
Yeah.
I would have loved that. But yes, I think I wish I realized earlier, not that I don't have any regrets at all, but if I was to have my time again, then I would have pursued something more creative a lot sooner, without a doubt. Because one thing that I've really come to realize is that I remember when one of my old friends came to my first exhibition, and he was someone that I knew as a mountain biker, as the adrenaline junkie who, made websites. And he came to the exhibition, and his response was just lovely. You could see he was like emotionally affected by it as well. And he said, Simon, this is your calling. And I was like, that was just it meant so much to me that he said that. It really did. Just a few very simple words, but I remember it very, very clearly. And I think that's the thing that I've come to realize is that having a creative career and just to create a daily creative pursuit is absolutely in line, more in alignment with who I am. And it's brought out a side of my personality that has always been there, but has never been able to flourish. So I guess I wish I'd discovered that sooner. And just having a creative pursuit is incredibly healthy. And I would encourage any young person, whether it's photography or writing or painting or just something that you can completely immerse yourself in, then pursue it and pursue it with absolute gusto and passion.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're going to have to wrap up now or soon.
Okay.
I have a couple more questions, though. Are there any photographers out there that you think I need to be talking to?
You've probably already spoken to them a bit. So these are people that I kind of know personally as well. So Rachel Talibar.
I've already spoken to Rachel, yep.
Okay. Joe Cornish.
Haven't spoken to Joe yet, but he agreed to be on the show a couple of weeks ago, so I'm just lining up a time with him, so that'll be good. Really looking forward to speaking with Joe.
Sandra Bartoka.
Spoke to her. Her episode's out a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, right. Theo Bosboom.
Haven't spoken to Theo.
Okay, there you go then. Theo. So he's in the Netherlands and he's got some beautiful work. And he did a presentation in the 617 Club as well, which was really good.
Nice.
So there you go.
All right. Well, thank you for that. My last question is one I've asked just about everybody on the podcast so far, and it's an important issue that I think we need to get to the bottom of. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Do you know what? I haven't had pineapple on pizza for donkey's years, and I love pizza. I make the dough and make pizzas at home. It's literally my favorite homemade.
Have you got your own pizza oven?
I haven't yet. I've had my eye on an outdoor one for ages, but I just haven't taken the plunge yet. This is probably something that I have to do this year. So no, I haven't had pineapple for a long time, but here's one just to kind of get your toes curling. My favorite pizza when I was young, so when I was at secondary school, was called a Capricorna, which was from the local takeaway, which was chicken, pineapple, and banana.
That's interesting.
There you go. Yes. But back then I absolutely loved it. I mean, my taste buds are very, very different now. But yeah, there'll be a few people wincing listening to that, I think. But it was great.
Fantastic. Oh, well, thank you so much for spending some time with us, Simon. It's been absolutely wonderful meeting you and getting to know you a little bit better. Where can people find your work?
So my website is baxter.photos, and that's also my Instagram handle as well. And you can, if you just search Simon Baxter on YouTube, you can see some videos too.
All right. Cheers, Simon. Thanks for being on the show.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoy the show. Keep listening because I've got some great guests coming up soon. You can find my work in this podcast at grantSwinburnephotography.com. I'm also on all of the socials except Twitter. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you need to do to share this thing so other people can find out more about it. And keep listening. As I say, we've got some really interesting stuff happening. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.